Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In the fall of 2019, the MIT Press was awarded an $850,000 grant from the Arcadia Fund for an ambitious project. Over a 3-year period, the press planned to develop a sustainable business model to allow it to release its front and back lists of monographs open access. And by the end of the 3-year project, MIT Press plans to make its model freely available to the university press community to adapt for their own open access ambitions. Back in April 2020 on the Authority File, we met with Terry Ealing, Director of Strategic Initiatives at MIT Press, and Raim Crow, a senior consultant at Spark, who was working with MIT Press on the OA Publishing Model project. At the time, they were conducting a deep dive into the monograph publishing market, studying the mind-bending array of variables to construct a foundation upon which to build the press's OA framework. You might want to go back and listen to those episodes, numbers 118 through 121, if you haven't already. Fast forward a year, and MIT Press has landed on a collective action pricing model called Direct to Open that they're about ready to roll out for their catalog. If successful, MIT Press will open all of its monographs, about 90 titles per year, starting in 2022 across its STEAM, humanities, and social sciences categories. Joining me for an update on the project are Emily Farrell, Library Partnerships and Sales Lead at the MIT Press, and Greg Yao, President of the Center for Research Libraries. In this third episode of our 4-part series sponsored by MIT Press, we dig deeper into Direct to Open's model, key performance indicators, and how models like these can re-engage libraries and university presses. What I'm also very curious about, obviously we've said that the model's not just for MIT Press, but it can be a version of it can be adoptable by any other press. And I'm wondering what that might look like down the road. Will it be similar to what you're doing? Are there other variables built into the model that other presses could implement, based on how they conduct their own business? What might that look like in terms of other presses using this model?
That's a good question. I think that and hopefully I'm not mistalking here. This is, I feel, in some ways it's something for Raim, because
Okay.
as the model builder, and I might need to check back with you to make sure I'm getting this right. But we, in putting the model together and taking the structure of it and working with our own content, there are a few things that we wanted to do that didn't end up fitting, and I think other presses will find the same issue. And one of the central ones was it would have been preferable to have 3 collections, 3 subject areas to bring the possible threshold lower. So we would be able to fund one third and 2/3 and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But especially at a press with the program that we have, which is incredibly interdisciplinary, trying to do that is not simple. Trying to create 3 evenly spaced or sized collections was complicated. And one of the things we needed to take into account was really the back-end logistics. One of the things that we've learned a lot about in the process of having our own ebooks platform is the amount of work it takes from our data services side to ensure that books are going into the right collections without too much manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
And having to work like line by line on every single book to make sure that happens is intense, labor intensive.
Yep.
So we wanted to make sure that this model was built in such a way that it's not adding too much more labor to a reasonably lean team. And I think that other presses will probably find the same thing, or may find that they want to have very specific subject collections,
Mm-hmm.
a history collection, a politics collection, and choose only to do that. So
Right.
I would hope that in the context of using this model, a press that feels most comfortable about making their military history program open will be able to do that and have it be a smaller scale project to start with, or only do that and go from there. And I think to that I suppose to me is what I think will be most beneficial, and how it will differ the most is in how presses choose to put their content into the model.
Mm-hmm. Okay. curious about, like, we've talked about sort of the one of the success factors is a certain threshold of library participation in the model. But I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the other key performance indicators that you'd be examining along the way as you roll this out. Obviously, number of libraries committing is one. What might some others be?
Something that I find interesting about open access books in particular, and Greg already talked about what a complex landscape it is for libraries. It's also complicated for presses, but it's also complex for authors, for researchers. And I think that there are ways that, particularly in comprehensively opening scholarly books, that we're able to piece these fragments together a bit better,
Mm-hmm.
and to try to make things a little easier for authors as well, and for them to understand what's going on and what a press is offering, what their options are. And I would hope that, particularly for authors in humanities and social sciences disciplines for whom monographs are most important, but who I think are still the most hesitant and concerned that there may be some sort of lowering of value when it comes to making your book open, that that we're able to sort of show authors how valuable that is. So I think that is one important sort of performance metric, if you like, that to see that we have that we have buy-in from our authors, and that they see the value of it. They see that their books are more widely read, or more widely cited. I know that's also not necessarily easily sort of shown as a one-to-one, but I think that the researcher piece of this is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Even beyond whether this model is successful and we are opening books next year, continuing to increase the collaboration with libraries. We've talked about that already, but I think that that can't be stated enough, how valuable that is in how we're going to change this landscape. Really listening to the feedback that we get. I mean, we just launched the press's first library advisory board this January, and so the value of those conversations really are more and more central to what we're doing, and this model is just a piece of that picture. So I'd say those are two important parts of it, and then as well what we've talked about before, to see this really, in the longer term, see the model taken up in different ways by other important monograph publishers, and seeing this provide a more financially sustainable way to publish high quality monographs.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Greg, I'm wondering, putting on sort of the consortia hat, how they might influence the model, so to speak, and or perpetuate OA concepts more broadly, and for university presses more specifically. I'm wondering what types of conversations you might be looking forward to with MIT press in this regard, but maybe other presses too, as hopefully the model gets adopted elsewhere.
Sure. Well, I think that one of the things that consortia can do, CRL, but other
Right.
consortia can do, is to use the power of their network to help focus attention on unworthy models, because I think that when I think of the scholarly communications crisis or the serials crisis, we oftentimes think about that in terms of cost. But I increasingly think about it in terms of cost on attention. It's just hard to keep, just thinking of all the capacity lost, among research libraries or presses or faculty, just trying to make sense of this incredibly complicated, and dynamic ecosystem. And I think if consortia, one of the roles that consortia could say is, look, we're coming together and we're using the power of consortia to direct not just dollars in a certain place, but actually attention. So we at the consortial level are looking at all of these different experiments, and we believe that this 4 or 5 experiments in the OA space, whether it's journals or monographs in this instance, or maybe in some other maybe another partnership in some way, this is what we want to invest in. This is what deserves our attention. I think that alone could be helpful, because there's such strong appetite among the hundreds of libraries, thousands of libraries in the country to get involved in this open game.
Yeah.
But how can you do it in a way that makes sense
Mm-hmm.
and isn't duplicating efforts or working at cross purposes? And I think consortia could play a really helpful role in helping to guide library attentions to projects that seem especially promising. I think consortia could really play that role. I'm keen for CRL to play that role, but that's something that all consortia could do to one degree or another.
Right. Yeah, that makes me think, Greg. I mean, as you look at some of these models, and you don't have to speak specifically to CRL but more broadly, even like what would be some criteria that one might use to evaluate a model to know that it's important enough to get behind?
Sure. So for me, there are the elements I look for, and there's I'm no doubt missing many, but the
Yep.
things I look for is I want to make sure that the partners are mission aligned.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't get through a single day of my life without relying on the products and services of commercial enterprises. So I want to recognize that right off the bat.
Right.
But when it comes to creating scholarship, when it comes to creating long-form scholarship, peer-reviewed scholarship, academic publishing, I look to partners that share the same incentives. And commercial publishers, their main incentive is profitability.
Mm-hmm.
But a university press, it's certainly to recover costs, be cost recovery, but it's to further knowledge production. That's what the MIT press exists for. That's what PLOS exists for. So the first thing I look for is there truly mission alignment at the level of incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking for nonprofit publishers. You can get more granular. You can get into business models, and within the nonprofit space. But I look for are we aligned in terms of mission and incentives? That's one, and that's probably the most important thing. The second thing I'm looking for are does this experiment produce and incentivize excellent content, really good scholarship, books and monographs that the world is better for them existing, and so that's it's good content of results. And the third thing I'm looking for, and this may sound a little strange, but I think it's essential. Does this experiment meaningfully change the conversation between academic presses, university presses, and libraries? Does it change the relationship? Does it change the conversation in some meaningful way? I refer to this as a story. I refer to this as the ice cream social challenge, right? So when I was at the MIT libraries, we wanted to work with the MIT Press. They're part of the same organization, like literally the same administrative organization on campus, but also part of MIT. And we would have our annual library ice cream social. And we started to invite all our colleagues at the press, of course, because we're all colleagues. And I look at a measure of success as if year on year there would be less pockets of just press and just library people
Right.
at the ice cream social. That is one of my key success metrics. And here's something I wanted to do in a prior conference I was at. We were talking about open access, and we had librarians and archivists and in the room, and we're talking about this open access and the Scalcom crisis. And I didn't ask this of the audience, and I really wish I had. And the question would have been to this audience of librarians: raise your hand if you have a personal relationship with a sales representative from a for-profit company. And virtually all the hands would go up. I mean, I know, and again, I'll point the finger first and foremost at myself. When I knew my Adam Matthew vendors and ProQuest vendors, and I know all the vendors. I didn't just know them; I knew them well. I knew about their families, right? So raise your hand if you know personally a member of the sales team from a commercial publisher. I'd expect all the hands to go up.
Yep.
And then I would say, leave your hand up if you have a single relationship with a staff member of a university press. Those hands are all going to come down, or a very large number of the hands are going to come down.
Yeah.
that is a metric. That is a key data point in this Qualcomm crisis.
Yeah, yeah, and one of my questions was going to be like, this model sounds like it can re-engage libraries and university presses over a common passion, which is obviously open access, but also, you know, the shared mission of disseminating research and knowledge as widely as possible. So, and then, but maybe, Emily, what ways would this model encourage that, and what are some of the ways these partnerships might strengthen ties between libraries and presses?
Yeah, I mean, I just here to all of those things. I think that being at a university press that really is one of reasonably few that has a library sales or library relations position, is really it's such a privileged position to be in, to get to have that relationship directly with libraries. But even at MIT Press, it hasn't been this position didn't exist for all, hasn't existed for all that long. I do think that there are so many conversations going on the library side about commercial consolidation, about the importance for university-owned infrastructure, and that's what university presses are. We are university infrastructure, and we do have a different view on, or are able to be more part of the conversation about things like data privacy, about archiving and why that matters. I think that there are a lot of, it's easy to sort of summarize that all by saying mission alignment, values alignment. But I think the great thing about having these conversations directly is that we can talk about all the pieces of that and what that means. How are we approaching open data? How are we approaching, university repositories? How are there ways that we can be doing that better as a press that is part of an institution? But the conversations do have to be, sometimes it is about it being the ice cream social, that it is, a conversation in the ways that those sort of comfortable, friendly conversations happen between sales reps at commercial presses and with librarians, because of the resources that are available at those sorts of presses. But, the first step is doing that with your own institution. If you're at a university press, talk to your library, go in and, make sure that they know that you aren't just, part of some large conglomerate of same, publishers. It is there's so much that university presses do, and also, like, on the individual level, I feel like a lot of the people at university presses are a lot more like the people that staff libraries. There's an incredible number of very idealistic, nerdy, bookish folks that really they love what they do, and they do it because the mission really matters personally. And I think that personal resonance and connection, it shouldn't be undervalued in terms of what that can produce in a cultural shift between libraries and presses, and how that sharing of knowledge can change what we do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. You just heard from Emily Farrell, Library Partnerships and Sales Lead at the MIT Press, and Greg Yao, President of the Center for Research Libraries. This 4-part series is brought to you by the MIT Press. Join us next week when we discuss whether COVID-19 has impacted rollout plans for the press's OA model, and the important role research libraries play in the larger ecosystem of scholarly publishing.
And when I think of partnerships between research libraries and research and librarians in the press, I see an incredible opportunity, because what you have are the libraries are working with faculty and students to procure content for them to do research and to produce scholarship. And then the faculty, the authors, are going to the presses to go work with their editorial, with their colleagues to get that content produced and copy edited and get a good marketing campaign around it. Those are different ends of a triangle, right? Authors, so there's faculty or authors as consumers of content, right? And they work with librarians, liaison librarians, reference librarians on that. And then they work with publishers to produce content. Well, we have an opportunity to bring those three sides of the triangle together, remake the institutions of publishing. And so I think that's the real opportunity. And that's the conversation we're trying to change. And that's how I think we can best change our condition of knowledge production in this moment of crisis.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.